There's a kind of presence that doesn't scream, doesn't impose, doesn't seduce, yet it's deeply desired. Maybe you've felt it before. Someone walks into a room, not the most attractive, not the most talkative, and yet there's something magnetic, and you can't quite explain what it is. It's not charm, it's not confidence, it's not technique or manipulation. It's something quieter, deeper, almost invisible. Today, we're going to talk about that presence, about the desexualized mind, and how, ironically, it holds the greatest power of attraction. This isn't about repression, or celibacy, or moral purity, that it's about an energy that's been pulled out of the psychic game. A mind that no longer chases approval or bargains for attention. A presence that doesn't beg with its eyes, doesn't negotiate with its touch, doesn't exhale need behind the mask of seduction. There is power in the absence of intention. And it's that power that begins to draw people in. Carl Jung once said the unconscious is shaped by everything we avoid confronting. And desire, especially unconscious desire, is one of the most deceptive forces in the human psyche. Because it lies that it pretends it's after the other person, but really, it's chasing wholeness. It's trying to escape, trying to fill a gap left wide open in childhood. And when sexuality operates unconsciously, it becomes a bridge to the abyss, a desperate attempt to satisfy with the body what the soul has never been allowed to feel. But a desexualized mind isn't cold. It's freed. It's not that it refuses desire out of duty. It simply no longer needs to seduce, because it has found inside what it used to beg for outside. Jung would call this the process of individuation, a descent into the unconscious where complexes lose their grip, where psychic energy is no longer enslaved by unmet drives, where the other stops being your salvation and becomes just another human being to in the ordinary mind. The gaze seeks validation to in the desexualized mind. The gaze rests, there's no urgency, no hunger, only presence. And presence, when it isn't needy, becomes magnetic. That it's as if people can feel that around you. There's no game, no pressure, no performance, just space, silence, truth. Someone who has desexualized their mind hasn't killed desire, they've transmuted it. The fire of libido has been redirected, no longer toward conquest, but toward creation, toward understanding, toward expansion. The creative energy that used to leak through fantasies and seduction tactics now expresses itself through the art of simply being. In a gaze that welcomes without invading. In a word that touches without trying to seduce. In gestures that ask for nothing in return. It's strange to say this, but true desire is only born where there is no need. When you don't need anyone, that's when real attraction begins, because the other person can feel it. They sense that you're not here to consume them, but to witness them. The desexualized mind is one that has already loved its own darkness, already visited its traumas, already sat face to face with its shadows. That's why it no longer looks for a cure in someone else. Jung said that unconscious desire is the language of archetypes, and that immature love is always symbolic. It's a search for the lost mother, the idealized father, the primal union we never got. But when you recognize that, when you see the projection, the transference, the fantasy, you begin to free yourself to desexualizing the mind is not about denial. It's about maturity. That it's when eros stops being an escape and becomes a bridge to reality. Imagine a fire, strong, alive, but contained inside you. Not to extinguish it, but to direct it. That's the essence of the magnetic presence born from a desexualized mind. Others feel that fire, but they don't get burned. Because the fire is not being used to seduce. It's being used to live. There is something deeply seductive about someone who doesn't need to seduce, because pure desire doesn't chase. It overflows, and when you overflow, you don't convince. You don't chase. You just are, and that's enough. But let's be honest. Most people are still chasing. waiting for a look, a touch, a nod of approval. Sexuality has become a currency, a tool, a disguise for power. How many people use their bodies like emotional resumes? How many confuse being touched with being loved? How many believe that sex opens the door to intimacy, when most of the time, it simply ends the illusion? The desexualized mind does not reject the body. It honors it. But it doesn't weaponize it doesn't kneel before desire. It watches desire, gently, consciously, calmly, and in not needing it, it becomes desired. Because there is something more powerful than the body, the peace of someone who doesn't beg. Getting to that point is hard. We live in a world that eroticizes everything, that turns connection into competition and sells validation dressed up as love. But there's a place beyond that, a place where touch isn't currency, where a glance isn't strategy, where presence doesn't demand performance. That's where real magnetism is born, in a mind that no longer needs to convince anyone. When you reach this inner state, something shifts. Others can feel that you don't need them, and paradoxically, that's when they might start wanting you. But be careful. This kind of presence can't be faked. You can't practice it in the mirror. You can't learn it from a book. It doesn't come from the surface. It comes from a journey. The desexualized mind is the result of grief. Grief for the seductive persona. Grief for the self that needed to be desired in order to feel real. Grief for the character who based their worth on other people's eyes. And yes, it hurts to lose that, because we were trained to believe that to be desired is to be loved, that to provoke is to have control, and that to seduce is to win. But that's the illusion, a costly one. Jung warned us. What we repress returns. What we deny ends up controlling us. When sexuality is repressed, it doesn't disappear. It hides in your words, your gestures, your connections. It turns relationships into battlegrounds, affection into addiction, desire into chains. Desexualizing the mind doesn't kill your power. It purifies it. It doesn't kill desire. It dissolves it into something bigger. When libido no longer seeks instant gratification, it becomes an ally of the soul. That's when real creativity is born. Real spirituality. Real presence. The kind that heals. The world is full of voices screaming for attention. But very few know how to hold silence. A deep silence. One that doesn't demand, doesn't beg, doesn't promise. It simply offers itself as space. The desexualized mind is that space. A space where the other isn't hunted, where there are no conquest tactics, where connection is no longer a transaction, but a dance, a subtle movement between two whole beings. And yes, it's terrifying for many, because most people have only learned how to exist by trying to be loved, trying to be chosen, trying to be good enough. But the person who desexualizes their mind stops trying. And in stopping, they find themselves. The shadow screams, "If we don't seduce, no one will stay." But the conscious mind answers, "I will." And in staying with yourself, everything changes. What was once noise becomes music. There's no more rush, no more hunger. The other stops being nourishment and becomes companionship. That's when you become magnetic. Not from need, but from wholeness. Desire becomes a reflection, not a request. But don't be fooled. This isn't a permanent state. It's a practice, a daily discipline. Because the temptation to play the game never fully disappears. The ego loves applause. The shadow loves control. And the unconscious loves repetition. That's why the path of the desexualized mind is also a path of emotional vigilance. It's not about closing yourself off to others. Quite the opposite. It's about opening up, fully, but without expectations, without traps, without invisible contracts. It's about opening up with lightness, presence, and truth. There's a silent maturity in someone who doesn't need to impress, a kind of elegance that has nothing to do with looks. A beauty that rises from the absence of pretense. Someone who doesn't need to be chosen, chooses better. Someone who doesn't need to be loved, loves more freely. That is power. But not a power that dominates. A power that holds itself, holds the other, holds the silence between the two. Jung taught us. Everything that doesn't become conscious becomes fate, and desire, when unconscious, traps us in cycles that we repeat relationships. We repeat patterns. We repeat emptiness. But when we finally see that our urge to seduce was just a way to soothe the pain of not being seen as children, everything begins to change. The wound starts to heal. Sexuality stops being a scream and becomes presence. And presence is what we're all starving for. Most people are so busy trying to be desirable, they've forgotten how to be real. But when you become real, deeply, brutally real, others feel it. And that feeling is what truly connects us, not the body, not the performance, but the truth that pulses in silence. That you've seen this before. People who enter a room and do nothing, yet they shift the energy. They carry a center, a stillness, a vibration that cannot be bought, cannot be performed, cannot be faked. The desexualized mind is that center, that stability that doesn't depend on someone else's gaze, that groundedness that no longer bargains its own presence. And paradoxically, that is what attracts the most, because we live surrounded by people who are trying to be sexy, interesting, desirable. But real magnetism doesn't come from trying. It comes from peace, from fullness, from the absence of need. Who doesn't need has more to give. Who is already full overflows. And that overflow, that's what seduces, not because it promises anything, not because it demands anything, but simply because it is. And when that presence shows up, something rare happens. The other person's nervous system calms. Their anxiety slows. Their desire turns into contemplation, because deep down, that's what we're all looking for. Not a body, but a soul that brings us home. Some people heal us just by being. The desexualized mind heals, not through need, but through wholeness. Not through conquest, but through presence. But this kind of mind isn't built through books or techniques. It's forged in exile, in long silences, in nights when you were completely alone and stayed without attention, without applause, without love. It was in that place, where no one was watching, that you began to be born. That's why Jung's path of individuation includes this painful separation. Separating from the seductive shadow, from the self that begged, from the desire that pleaded, not to become cold, but to finally be warmed by your own fire. That inner fire burns away the need for approval, the fantasies of conquest, the emotional dependencies disguised as passion, and what's left is real. That what's left is your core, your essence, the part no one can take from you. It doesn't need to compete. It doesn't need to convince. It doesn't need to shine. It just breathes, and in that breath it attracts. Without effort, without intention, without noise. The desexualized mind is the opposite of noise. It doesn't live off stimulation. It lives off presence. And those who live in presence know the body doesn't need to show everything, say everything, offer everything, because mystery is more powerful than exposure. Silence is more seductive than insistence. And calm is more attractive than performance. That's the secret few understand. The less you try to be desired, the more real you become. And this isn't just any kind of desire. It's clean, free of urgency, free of manipulation, free of hunger disguised as love. That it's a desire that sees, not one that devours. And that kind of recognition is rare, because it requires that the other has also walked the path. Yes, the desexualized mind will attract fewer people, but it will attract better. It will attract those who see the soul, not the persona. Those who are ready to stop playing and start living. Because deep down, we're all exhausted by shallow encounters, predictable seductions, performed sensuality hiding broken hearts. What we really want, even if we don't know how to say it, is someone whole, someone who doesn't offer themselves as a solution, but as a presence, someone who doesn't need to be desired because they already fully desire themselves. That person is only born after grief. Grief for the seductive self. Grief for the body as a power tool. Grief for the need to please. And that rebirth is painful, but liberating, because in the silence that remains, you hear yourself. In the absence of others' desire, you rediscover your own. And in that moment, everything changes. You stop broadcasting urgency. You stop negotiating your presence. You stop molding yourself to be accepted. You just are calm, honest, whole. And in a world that's constantly screaming, that silence is a call, but not a call to seduce, a call to return. Return to essence, to soul, to truth. The desexualized mind is the altar where the sacred in the other can finally rest, because there's no invasion, no game, only space. And what could be more seductive than someone who offers space? Space for you to exist, to breathe, to be, without fear of being used. That is the new seduction, the one that doesn't promise, doesn't beg, doesn't trap. It just happens. And when it happens, it's like time stops. Because finally, someone is there, fully, quietly, alive. You can't explain it, but you feel it. And once you do, you'll never settle for less again. If this message stirred something in you, it means you're already on the path back to yourself, the path away from performance and toward truth. And if you felt seen in these words, someone else will too. So share this. Let it reach those still trapped in the noise. Let it remind someone that they don't need to seduce to be worthy. And if you want to keep diving into the kind of truth that frees you, subscribe and come with us. Because in a world screaming to be desired, we're building a space where being real is enough.